welcome back to the Business Wingmen Show. We're glad you came around this week. I'm Steve Smith, and my co-host Travis Smith is here with me today, and we're going to dive into another really interesting topic that affects everybody. Everybody, the minute you hear what this is all about, you're going to realize everybody's got this. You've talked about it before. You've probably had discussions about how it holds you back, but maybe you don't think about it as much as we're going to talk about it today. And the whole idea is everybody's got a comfort zone. You know, it's that safe space in your head that you feel completely confident in. There's no stress, there's no worry, there's no fear, but there's also probably no growth. There's no excitement. There's no, doing things that you always wanted to do but have never done before because you're too much in your comfort zone. So we're going to kind of dive into that and tear that one apart and hopefully give you some ideas about how you can change the comfort zone that you might have locked yourself in now, and you're kind of hostage to your own head. So, Travis, when you think about comfort zone, what comes to mind for you?
Boredom.
Yeah.
When you brought up this topic, and then since then I've read a couple articles, of one of which you sent me. That's the number one thing that I think of when I even go back into my own career, when I've been in those moments where, unfortunately, when you're in the comfort zone, especially when it starts at first, it's kind of hard to recognize.
Yes.
But usually it's once you've been there, maybe several weeks or several months. I mean, heaven forbid,
How about several years?
Right. Yeah. But, the funny thing that happens is all of a sudden we start feeling we're a little bored, right? We don't have that same kind of energy and enthusiasm to come into the office.
Right.
And since all of our discussions here are work related, I've definitely experienced this in my career. And the funny thing was, I don't know if I would have necessarily attributed it directly in that moment to being in a comfort zone.
Right.
I think I was just in my head, I was kind of complaining. It was like, this sucks. This is boring. This is not what I want to be doing, and you go through the motions, right? So I'm really looking forward to diving into this discussion.
Well, and what you just said there, going through the motions, I think that's one of the biggest indicators, maybe not to the person with the issue, but to people around them. You're phoning it in. You've plateaued in your performance. You're not coming up with any new innovative things. You're not learning anything. You're just basically riding on what you've always done. And, look, it affects people in professional sports. It affects people in the entertainment industry, certainly people in business, especially people in sales, where, every single day you get up, you've got to prove yourself. You got to do better than you did yesterday. And so if you get trapped in a comfort zone that says, hey, it's okay, don't need to go out, we'll just stay where we are, just phone it in. That's, I think, over time is what causes people not even be able to put out what kind of goals they want to reach because they've forgotten how to think about them.
Well, and how easy is it to just kind of get in your mode of coming in every day, checking in, and, for what it's worth, having that mentality of, hey, I showed up, didn't I? Right. And you
right.
almost kind of forget.
I didn't ghost you. You should be happy about that.
Right. I'm not quite quitting.
Right.
I freaking hate that word.
Oh, God.
Anyways, so the thing that I find really interesting about this idea of the comfort zone, and one of the articles actually was the one that you sent me, I found really interesting because I didn't know some of the back information about that term actually being much older than what I appreciated.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think a lot of us can think back to, especially if you've been in business for a while, that was kind of a popular 90s phrase. And you'll have to excuse me, I forget the woman that had come up with that as a result of, she wrote a book. It was like the danger. It was almost like the danger zone. I know that's not what it was,
right.
But they actually talked about the psychological behavioral side of it coming back from like the early 1900s.
Yes.
So I found that really interesting because what it tells me is this is nothing new. It's just how we're applying that same knowledge, right, to present day workforce.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So when you think about the kind of role that you have in career you've chosen, whether you're somebody in a company who's really in charge of doing things that help the company move forward, or whether you have your own business, you've started off as a small business entrepreneur and you're trying to make your way in your marketplace. the worst thing that you can end up, having feeling every day is your elbows bumping up against the walls of your own comfort zone. Because if that's the case, you're going to go for years and years and years at a level that you're probably unhappy with, but you've learned to accept because you don't think there's any more out there for you.
Look, I agree with what you just said, but think about that. The whole trick with what you've just identified is actually figuring out that you're in your comfort zone early.
Yeah,
right? Because look, every one of us in our career at some point, we've had issues. Whether that issue was just one day, or that issue went on for weeks. I mean, hopefully not years, but I can certainly appreciate that that has happened to a variety of people. The whole trick there is, how do you identify it? I'm in my comfort zone, and then actually doing something about it, putting some action behind it.
Right.
That's what I believe is the difference maker between people who are consistently successful and those who all of a sudden wake up in their 40s, 50s, and beyond saying like, oh, like I really didn't go with where, I didn't take my career where I had really wanted to take it. And like, oh, is it too late?
Yeah, look, I don't know that everybody walks around with what I call an accomplishment yardstick, meaning over a period of time, you measure yourself in where you think you should have been, okay, either in your career employment stage or being in some kind of entrepreneurial stage. And what happens is you're either measuring yourself or you're measuring other people who are doing similar things and figuring out, am I keeping pace? Or are they moving forward and creating a gap and leaving me behind? And I think that happens with a lot of folks. They probably don't talk about it, or maybe they talk about it with their close contacts and friends. But I think that yardstick thing, we all have a way of measuring ourselves against other people. So a lot of times it's unfair, and you shouldn't do it because it automatically puts you at the defensive. But I think once you realize that you've fallen behind, or the progress you thought you should have made hasn't come about, most of the time it is a comfort zone issue, but I don't know that everybody immediately goes there first. I think they probably go deeper and say, well, I'm a failure, or I'm just not cut out for this, or, success wasn't meant for me. All of these kind of more psychological hits that we throw on ourselves before we just say, well, maybe I'm just too much in a zone of routineness and expectedness. And so, maybe I need to pull those walls down a bit.
Would you agree though, that list that you just shared, those are all excuses?
Oh, sure.
So, I mean, really at the end of the day, I suppose it doesn't matter how far down the road you determine that you're in the comfort zone. I mean, yes, we would like to identify that earlier than later, but just the opportunity and or the ability to self-identify that is huge.
Yes.
Because really at the end of the day, what is the comfort zone? It's based on what you and I were talking about earlier and a couple of these articles that I've read, as well as my own experience. I would tell you that it's a mode where I don't know if mailing it in is fair, because I think that has a pretty heavy negative connotation to it.
Right.
But I would tell you is that it's basically an area in your career that's devoid of risk.
Yeah, I think people that build a really, really thick, small comfort zone that they live in, I think they've built up this idea that having the unexpected happen is fearful. I can't launch into anything unless I know exactly what's going to happen. And when you get to that point, then you're not going to try anything new.
Well, what? Right. I mean, here's the thing though, not trying something new. Think about what that entails. We use the word risk, or we use the word fear, right? But one of the things that I've learned over the years from some of this management training that I've been through, and I feel so fortunate to have had that opportunity to go through some of this stuff.
Yes.
Like Ken Blanchard, for example. I mean, some of his training is absolutely amazing. Is it talks about, as a leader, if you want your people to take action and take risks, you have to build an environment that supports that.
Right.
Right. So when we talk about a comfort zone, there's a diagram that, and maybe we can put this up online, but the diagram shows 4 different zones. Comfort zone being first, then preceding that is the fear zone, then the learning zone, and then finally the growth zone. But the funny thing is, how often do we find that when we are in the comfort zone, we can never get either into or beyond the fear zone?
Right.
Right.
Right. Because you're so comfortable with that small space that you've been living in. The idea of going someplace that's fearful and actually, facing that, for a lot of people, they're just not going to do it. Now, what I will tell you is that most people can be coaxed into it if there's somebody else doing it with them. So it's a lot of times people say, well, gee, I want to put together this seminar, but I don't want to do it all myself. I have to find somebody to help me. Then you kind of get, other people's energy can help you walk down that road that you say you want to go down to, but you're too afraid to do it by yourself.
And sure. And sometimes that can help us take that first step out of comfort zone. The old saying is, there's safety in numbers, right?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
But that being said, that's also why I brought up just a moment ago the point of, if you own a business or if you're a leader, one of the best things you can do is create an environment that supports risk taking. Or look, at the end of the day, we're all going to make freaking mistakes.
Right.
I feel like once or twice a week I do something, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it's like catastrophic, but where it's like, all right, well, I could have done that better.
Yes.
But if the environment in which you lead and operate in is supportive of that, and it has that mentality of, hey, fail fast, then
yes,
I really do believe more people will take advantage of, I feel like maybe I'm in my comfort zone. All right, what can I do to get out of this?
Right.
And then that's when all of a sudden you start seeing people like, they're raising their hand saying, hey, boss, anything else that I can do? Hey, we have that big project coming on board. What can I do to get on that team? Right. And so they're starting to show a little bit more initiative.
Yes.
Or just flat out conversation about, hey, I feel like I've been doing this a long time. What's the next step for me?
Right. No, I think putting yourself out there is one of the first steps to breaking out of the comfort zone you've created for yourself. But I also think a lot of people they need a reason why I should put myself in that situation, especially if they've got a deep-seated fear of the unknown, and most of the fear people associate with the unknown is not the experience that's required. It's the idea that if this doesn't work, I'm going to lose something valuable. I might lose a job. I might lose a friend. I might lose, revenue. I mean, there's something that keeps them, even though they look at it and they say, okay, it makes sense on paper, but you know what? There's that one chance that if I do this and it doesn't work, this is going to happen. So they've already kind of fulfilled in their own mind what the negative outcome is going to be, which I think is what locks people in and keeps them from wanting to move forward.
Well, and that's because that mindset, they're stuck in the fear zone.
Yeah.
Where they're finding excuses, they lack self-confidence. But what I would tell you is that for a fair amount of people who are either they're verging into that zone, or they're having a trouble getting out of the fear zone to really get to that point of where they are growing.
Right.
There's a lack of incentive. So if you think about that, why is it people take risks?
Yeah.
Because they're incentivized.
Right, because they see the upside of going through that murky, unknown area as being a whole lot more rewarding and valuable than sitting where they are.
And agreed. And I would also tell you that they know going into it, it's not going to be easy. So their mindset, even though they might not know all of the steps,
right,
they understand that it's a process that they're going to have to go through, which is that learning zone, right? I know I'm going to have to acquire new skills. I'm going to have to deal with problems I've not dealt with. Right. And so they have the mindset that I'm willing to go through that to get to the point of where I'm growing again, which is living with purpose, having a job that is supporting your goals and whatnot.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about, for that very first step, we've already talked about the acknowledgement part. The reason that things aren't happening, nothing's going anywhere, is because I'm too much in my own comfort zone. So once somebody comes to that conclusion, the next thing is, what do I do to, get out of it or expand it, make it bigger, whatever it is. So I'm doing things that right now I'm just choosing not to. what can you think of that people can do to help them become more comfortable with uncertainty or potential risk?
Well, I mean, like take my situation, for example. I left, as you certainly well know, I left a job that I had been in, same company, for 10 and a half years.
Right.
This company was $6.5 billion revenue annually as a privately held company. So I left that organization after a decade to become an employee of one. The reason I did that, and I will openly admit to you, I was in my comfort zone quite deep towards the end of that time period with that company.
Yes.
It was still a good experience. That comment should not be construed as it wasn't a good job or a good career.
Right.
I just felt myself going stale and I wasn't pushing the envelope. And
Right.
that's the best way I can describe it. Was I was coming up, I was hitting my numbers, I was showing up to work, I was doing all those right things, but it just felt like it was like, dude, I have more to offer here. So when I made that leap, I mean, I spent an exhaustive amount of time researching and talking to other business owners and just learning before I made the jump. And that would be, look, I mean, that story of mine is not like a lot of other people's stories. So I would say that if you're listening and you're at a point in your career where you feel like you could be in your own comfort zone, the first thing you should try to do is understand what that actually means. Because if you don't understand why you're there, you're not going to understand what it's going to take to get you out of it.
Right.
Right.
And I think so many people go through careers 20, 30 years or more, and one day they wake up and they realize, okay, it's been a good ride, but it's been a largely unfulfilling ride.
100%.
And now they're in their early 50s. I mean, certainly I was in the same boat. And my ride wasn't unfulfilling, but I still always believed that my best work was ahead of me. I just didn't know what it looked like. And so when I finally lapsed into what I'm doing now, I mean, it was predictably like a lot of startups. It was rough for the first couple of years, but I look at the things that I learned as the equivalent of another MBA. But once I got into that mode of, okay, I'm not going to go bankrupt and starve by doing this, it kind of opened up those doors to say, how much of this stuff can I absorb and learn and work with so I can eventually, get to a base where I feel like I've accomplished something.
And think about what you just said too. I mean, when you left your career at, or at least corporate America, we should say,
right,
at the age of 51, give or take, you were a senior director in a company that was just verging on $1 billion, give or take.
Yep.
Big company.
Yep.
I would guess, just by knowing your background, your career, I mean, you had pretty much been there and done most of what it was that you were doing on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, it was very repetitive, different faces, different product lines, different kind of customer orientations, but the whole methodology was pretty much the same.
Right. So I think what would be fair to say is that was a season of your professional life that was good, right? It had some ups and downs, but for the most part, if you look over that 30 plus some odd years, it was a good experience. But it's what led you to where you are today. And I think that's probably one of the biggest things that, as I've been doing a little bit more research on the comfort zone, is to understand that sometimes you just have to go through that maze to get to the point of where you realize that you have a good opportunity. And yes, it does take some calculated risk to make a little bit of that jump.
Right. Well, I will tell you this, because while I was going through this, I ran into just hundreds of other people through networking and all kind of other affiliations that were basically thinking about or trying the same thing. And one of the biggest negative talk tracks I heard people talk about was the idea of being somewhat matured in their prior career. They'd been doing something for 30, 35 years. They were now in their kind of middle 50s and feeling kind of unfulfilled. But the thing that was holding them back was this mindset that if I go out and do something and I'm starting over again, I'm starting at square one. And a lot of them just they couldn't put their arms around that, even though it was a different avenue, a different business, something that they were calling the shots on themselves. They weren't reporting up through this massive hierarchy of the whole idea of doing that in their mind said, I'm at a pinnacle now, and that means I've got to get off and start at square one again. I just can't do that at my life stage. And I sat there and I thought, oh my God, what I need to do is stop listening to these people.
Well, it's so funny about the way you just described that. So, at what age would you say typically, and I know this is a generalization, but at what age would you say most people you've come across have that kind of moment, that euphoric, like, oh, well, I can do this, but then I'm starting over and I've been doing this for so long.
They're anywhere from 48 to 56.
So that is one of the biggest reasons I left my job with my former employer, was because I had already been there 10 years. I was, I don't know, 32 at the time.
Right.
And I saw a bunch of people who were either peers and or ahead of me in terms of tenure and title.
Right.
And they were stuck.
Right.
Now, don't get me wrong. They had wonderful compensation.
Right.
But they had worked for the same company for, like, and I'm not joking, some of the tenure was pretty amazing, 20, 25 plus years.
Right.
And the issue, though, is, I'm sure you've heard this phrase, the golden handcuffs.
Yes.
Some people get to the point in their career where they're being compensated so well that they can't leave their job.
Yes.
And then therefore their
Right.
comfort zone, air quotes,
it's financial.
is financial.
Right.
Because they've built up a lifestyle that requires them to make that kind of cash.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that, I mean, look, I don't want anybody listening to this program today to think that you shouldn't aspire and work hard to reach a level where you're being compensated at a top tier rate for whatever you're doing. But you also have to realize that in today's corporate America, mid-level, mid-sized business level, once you're at a premium number and you're in your middle to late 50s, man, you are a big giant target walking around the hallways, because companies don't really want to hold on to people that long. They want to keep cycling through and getting, young upstarts that want to bring fresh, new, innovative ideas. They don't want somebody that's just gotten so sedate in what they do that what they do doesn't really matter that much anymore.
Well, that's the hard. I haven't been there yet, and I would say you're not there yet.
No,
but that's the hard thing to judge, is like, how do you look at a really healthy compensation and turn your back on that, right? And look, for what that's worth, compensation's not everything.
Right.
I mean, I know many people who in their jobs are compensated handsomely, and that you don't ever hear them talking about their job like they love it. Now, they go in, they do a job, they perform well, they're A players, but they're not ecstatic about it. Usually when they come home, you hear about this laundry list of hobbies that they have that really, and then all of a sudden you can see it in their face. It's like they're glowing, and they're passionate.
Right.
And all of a sudden it's like, well, all right, the job is a paycheck.
Well, and that, unfortunately, for many people through the midlife of their career, especially if they haven't had opportunities to take. See, I think the thing that kept me from getting to that point was all the transfers that I would take. And you get promoted and you get moved to another location, or you take on a new business unit. You're always feeling like, okay, I know what I need to do, but now I have to learn new people and make new relationships and understand different aspects of how this part of the business works. That's enough to kind of get you back in that game of learning and going through that cycle and making the mistakes and doing everything that people should be doing. But if you're locked into a job and you keep getting promoted, but you never leave the office you're in, that's where I think people, after a while, they look at what they're doing. They say, yeah, I'm making great money, but, I'm not really that wowed about what I do every day. And I think that's the thing that causes that comfort zone, the walls, to get really, really thick. And all of a sudden they're in a situation where they start getting nervous because they're like, oh my God, they're making cuts. This person left. Nobody knows why. And you start looking at yourself and saying, when am I next? And oh my God, if that happens to me, what am I going to do?
Well, and think about that. We're talking about these kind of states of influence, right? The comfort zone to the fear zone, learning zone, and then into growth. I would contend that as risk, or fear, if you want to kind of put it that way, but risk really, as that becomes limited, so does your progress professionally.
Yes.
So that's the other thing that I think about. And look, for what it's worth, I'm sure there are people that are listening here that are saying, well, I don't need to progress. I like what I do. I'm fine.
Right.
And that's okay.
Right.
So I want to make sure that the message here today is that it's not such that, well, if you're not progressing, then you're in a dead end job. That's absolutely not what we're saying.
No, because what you just mentioned about people who talk glowingly about their hobbies, I can't tell you how many people I've run into throughout my years of being in business who did really good work in a particular job or a level of responsibility, but that's not what wound their clock. They were playing on a softball team in their town, or they were, they were coaching Little League, or they had some other kind of really odd hobby that they had lapsed into that gave them a feeling of personal satisfaction that the job never could.
And you know what? And that's healthy for some people.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So actually, a good friend of mine, it's interesting that we're talking about this because just about 2 weeks ago, this person shared with me that they were at least at the very beginning stages of a very dramatic career change. This person's a little younger in their career, so they've been in the working world about 7 to 8 years, give or take. But they're going from present day being an accountant to applying for law enforcement.
Dang.
So, I mean, you want to talk about a shift and like jumping out of your comfort zone. And this person financially does well for himself. He has a family. They do, they have the things that they need, if that's even important. But the funny thing was, I really applauded what he shared with me. And I told him, I was like, you know what? That's awesome.
Hopefully, hopefully he's a CPA and he's applying to go to the FBI school, because that's a natural matchup.
No, actually, he is an accountant and he is applying to become
like a beat cop,
okay. So, it's weird. That's what I had in my head. And I just wasn't sure if that was a polite way to describe it, but yes, standard law enforcement,
right.
Which by the way, we need.
Right.
Yeah.
So, we need, everybody's willing to do that.
So like, I got to tell you, in that, I just looked at that situation. I was like, you know what? Hats off to him.
Yes.
Because he is doing something about the fact that he knows he is in a comfort zone right now.
Right.
And you know what? Could he sit in that comfort zone for another 10 years and financially do well? His family would be supported. He could. But the funny thing is, over a period of time, and it sounds like this has been somewhat recent, he's come to realize that it's just not for him. Spreadsheets, sitting in front of the computer all day long, right? It's just not. He wants to be out in the community making a difference. And the funny thing was, almost verbatim, that's what he told his wife. And she was really supportive. And I got to tell you now, this couple in particular, that doesn't surprise me. But how many people do you think could go to their spouse and say, hey, I'm leaving my corporate job that is incredibly safe. I mean, the worst thing that's going to happen to me is maybe a paper cut or my hand gets stuck in the vending machine in the kitchen, right?
Right.
To, hey, I'm putting my life on my line every day I go to work.
Well, what's funny about that, when I went to college out of high school, I declared a major because I was certain I knew what I was going to be. And so I was going after their accounting degree. My second semester in, the woman that was teaching the course that I was in was also the head of that department. Okay. And she pulled me into her office one day and she says, tell me a little bit about this idea of you becoming an accountant. And I had it all wrong. I was assuming an accountant made a lot of money, right? So I was equating that. And she goes, I'm going to be honest with you. She goes, I look at you and I look at the accounting field, and you don't have the personality for an accountant. There's a lot of things you could do well. Accounting is not one of them. And so, so I walked out of the office and I'm like, all bummed out. I'm thinking, well, what the hell am I going to do now? Well, I switched it over to a business degree because accounting was a portion of that. So it wasn't going to lose anything. It just wasn't the main focus. But if it hadn't have been for her, I might have stayed in that way too long, got disenchanted with the whole thing, might have left school altogether, or might have felt like, well, now I can't get out of it because I've invested too much into it. And I'm going to lose stuff if I go to some other degree that I'm more passionate about. So I think sometimes when people see that and they see a mismatch, but they realize you're sticking to it, not because it's something that you really think you're going to be good at, but you've created this kind of zone of familiarity, or this zone of, gee, I don't have any fear in the outcome of this. I'm going to stick where I'm at. That I think that's a great gift, that the celestial stars have given you to help you figure out that maybe the choice you made wasn't the right one.
Well, and think about how hard that is too. Like in poker, for example, there's a phrase when you're playing Texas Hold'em.
I know
it's called being pot committed,
right?
Which basically refers to the fact that financially you're so far down through that particular hand that for some people you're just not going to turn away. You're going to keep playing that hand until Fifth Street rolls out.
Right.
You know what? You lose, maybe you're not, but at that point, it's like you're not giving up just because like the dollars are there on the table.
Right. Absolutely.
But I would tell you that based on what you just shared, that's what happens to people in their career.
Yeah.
They
become pot committed. Right.
Right. They go to college for some kind of a degree. Right. So we'll use your example as an accountant. Poor accountants. By the way, I love my accountant. So if you're listening,
right,
for what that's worth, thank you.
I'm glad you pursued your career.
Yeah. But I mean, that being said, so I mean, it could be anything, right? Maybe you're a civil engineer.
Right.
And that's what you go to school for. You get out, you get a job, you're working in your profession, and it's fine, right? You're compensated well. But 10, 15 years in, you just have that feeling that this is not what it's all cracked up to be.
Right.
And I'm bored. What else do I have in the tank? How many people stay in that job another 10 to 15 years simply because they're pot committed?
All right. So let's switch the direction of this conversation now and talk about what people can do to help them become more comfortable with the unknown. In your daily life, what behaviors can you practice that might allow you to kind of loosen up a bit and be willing to take risks? It doesn't have to be Herculean stuff, but just things that would allow you to be more flexible and more adaptable and feel good about it, even when you're not totally certain of what's going to happen. What kind of things can you think about that you would tell somebody that is just like really wound tight and they don't like where they're at and they would love to do something different, but they're just not willing to branch out and take that first step? How would you guide them to help them start getting the emotional and psychological feeling of, if I do this and it doesn't work, that's okay? What kind of things could you help people practice in their daily life?
Well, I mean, the first thing is just, what's the risk of not doing it? Right? So you're in your job today. If you don't do X or follow X or whatever that means,
right,
what are you losing? And maybe the answer is you're not losing anything, but you're certainly not gaining.
Right.
That's for damn sure.
Right.
So I think the first piece is it just depends on what the situation is. For me, in my situation, it was literally changing my career. Now, granted, I'm in the same field, but I went from being an employee of 10,000 people to literally an employee of one.
Right.
And it's been an amazing ride, 7.5 years into it. Maybe for other people, it's not changing or leaving their job. It's just taking on a different set of responsibilities. And that could be as simple as, going and scheduling some time with your boss and sitting down and saying, hey, this area over here, going back to our accounting situation, I've got this on lock. I know how to do this with my eyes closed. Are there opportunities either here or in another business unit or another department where I can take these skills and take on some additional work, an additional project? For example, even within accounting, there are subsets of accounting that get very technical, like, for example, cost accounting.
Right.
Go out there and try to find me a good cost accountant. It is really difficult.
And you can say that for a lot of very technical fields today, that people either have the skills and haven't been willing to really apply them, or they just don't want to do it. It's that they want things to be nice and smooth and predictable and end every day at 5 o'clock. And that's a comfort zone. That's something that somebody has cultivated very well without realizing it.
It could also look like maybe you've determined this is the job for me. I love this job. I love this career. But maybe it's just taking that individual job a little bit step further. That doesn't necessarily mean it needs to be a project. Maybe it's a certification, for example. So my father-in-law, obviously, he is a civil engineer by trade. He's in his, I think, early 60s at this point. Just a couple of years ago, he went and got his PE license, his professional engineering license.
Oh, wow.
I mean, I will tell you that is an incredibly difficult process to go through, and the test is not easy.
Right.
This is not like showing up and just answering a couple hundred questions. You've got to take classes. You've got to study for this thing. I mean,
you have to invest time, and you have to be focused.
It's a big investment.
Yes.
So I don't know the exact age, but just my guess is he probably did that around the age of 59 or 60. I mean, you know what? I look at that, and that's an amazing opportunity with somewhat low risk, but lots of reward that can potentially come out of that. And the funny thing is, he does consulting work on the side up in the area that he lives in, and he gets all sorts of gigs because he now has that PE license.
Right.
And so the funny thing was he invested some time. So I guess, you could argue the investment of time is a risk because you can't get time back. So I can.
And what you invest over here, you're going to forego someplace else.
Right.
So you have to make that conscious decision where you're going to apply that time to go after that. Absolutely.
So, he's been in academia for, I don't know, 30 plus years, but within his realm of engineering studies, which is groundwater hydrology, if you can appreciate that. But he then goes out and gets the PE license, and then now is able to pick up side projects. And the funny thing is, guess what he shared with me about these side projects?
What?
They're really, really interesting. Every situation is different.
Right.
And it really causes him to have to buckle down and think because the solutions are not always present.
Yes.
I mean, he even, I don't know if I won't just for purposes of, but he even got contacted because the area that he lives in, there are a lot of affluent people in that area. He got contacted by a husband and wife, two names you would know easily, and you could rattle off 20 movies these people have been in, to do a private project for them because they were getting ready to sue the city.
Oh,
so
okay.
I mean, and he, at the conclusion of it, they invited him back to the house. They had dinner and all this kind of stuff. I mean, I would tell you this: these are people I would love to do dinner with.
Yeah, right.
You know what I mean? Because they're just fascinating people, especially based on the roles they take in movies. But he never would have got that opportunity if he had just purely stayed in academia.
Yes.
And for what it's worth, his job at the university that he teaches at is excellent.
Yes.
But he took, and he even told my wife and I, he took a little bit of a chance. He did not pass the test the first time. He passed it the second time. But I think that's a great example of when we're talking about leaving your comfort zone, it doesn't need to be for this giant departure from what you know of reality.
Yes.
Right.
It could be just an expansion on what you're doing now.
Right. 100%. And I think for a lot of people, that's probably the best way to start off.
Yes.
See how you like going through the fear zone, then being back in a mode of learning, right? Build, like, operating within that space where you're uncomfortable. I think that's a really powerful thing.
Well, you asked me earlier about that age span where people, kind of get this feeling that they need to go out and do something else. I'll tell you something else that I ran into quite a lot was people who had been in certain career positions for long periods of time. And then all of a sudden at that same age interval found themselves out of work. The company either downsized, they got riffed, something happened. And all of a sudden they didn't have the job that they were showing up to every single day for the last 30 years. Now they had to completely change their own mindset about, now I have to go out and market myself to someone else.
Oh my gosh.
I have to find another job forget about finding something in a completely different industry. I've got to go back and get into the business I was in before with somebody else. And the amount of people that I personally knew that were completely and totally frozen.
Caught off guard.
Yes, just the whole idea that, oh my God, I'm not getting up every day and getting dressed and going to, that same office. Now I've got to decide what I'm going to do today because it's not being decided for me. And it paralyzed them, completely paralyzed them.
Well, it becomes your identity.
Yeah.
I mean, think about that. Who you are, the job you have, the title you have, the company you work for, that becomes your identity as a professional. So all of a sudden, when that's ripped out from underneath you, especially if it's because of a layoff, unfortunately, I mean, that's a rude awakening. And, I mean, you've been to these events. I had been a part of a nonprofit for a number of years in our industry. We would see this all the time at these events.
Right.
People would show up. And, we tried to be a very inclusive and friendly organization. So you approach these people, introduce yourself. Almost immediately, if we had never seen them there before, one of the most popular reasons why they were showing up was because they had found themselves unemployed,
right,
and needed to get back in the game,
right,
air quotes,
yes, right,
after basically never doing it.
Yes.
So the problem was, I mean, you want to talk about a hardcore comfort zone? They had no connections outside of the people that they worked directly with.
They were now being forced to live outside the box as opposed to staying inside the box.
Right. They didn't know much what was going on in the industry.
Right.
I mean, that alone is a good enough reason to, as often as possible, try to work outside of your comfort zone. Even if it's just networking and staying on top of the industry.
Yes.
That can just be enough for some people, just so you're not caught off guard.
Right. And you know what? Whether you're looking for a job or you're looking to get into a business on your own, I think one of the greatest advantages to getting comfortable with the uncertain, the unknown, not expecting a predictable outcome, is to learn how to network. In fact, I've suggested to people that are really just totally, they're incapable of going out to a networking event by themselves. Find a buddy, get into a buddy system. Yeah. You and somebody else go to that networking event and work it together. Get used to working the floor, meeting people, having little, light, 2 or 3 minute conversations, but do it with somebody else. If that's what it takes for you to go into an area, which for most people is way outside their comfort zone, it's having a strategy. Another thing, in people that I've worked with in the past who have found themselves in that situation, as I said, find something in your daily routine to change. Because most of the time, your comfort zone is not just work. It's your life. It's from the time you wake up in the morning to the time you go to bed at night. You're literally doing the same thing every single day without even realizing it. Sometimes it means waking up at a different time, doing something different in the morning, adjusting your routine to the point where you're now, because you're going to be uncomfortable doing it for the first couple of days or a week. But at some point, what you need to be used to is being able to do that and not feeling uncomfortable doing it.
Gosh, I have such a timely example of that. My wife, who obviously well, found this gym. This was actually right smack in the middle of the pandemic, or kind of when it started, 2020. And we just you couldn't do anything. Yeah, you could go outside, but I was kind of a gym rat prior to that. So all of a sudden, the bigs are all closed down. You can't go in there.
Right.
And it was funny because the way that you were describing the person gets laid off and they're just like, they don't know what's going on. That's how I felt when the big box gym retailers closed down.
Yes.
There's just like, what the hell do I do now? I even went out and bought some equipment for the house, never used it.
Right.
My discipline was absolute crap when it came to that.
Right.
And so my wife finds this gym and she's just coming home every day and she is so excited about the experience. And granted, the honeymoon phase was there, right? So, but I started getting curious. And I had always had a kind of a bad taste in my mouth about CrossFit. Okay. And this gym is not CrossFit, but it's similar. So I was like, all right, I'm going to go check this out. We'll just see what's going on. So long story short, the reason I share that story is because I had to completely change my entire schedule every single day to work in going to this gym.
Hmm.
getting up early. I mean, getting up early for me was like 6:30. But but to go to the gym at this place, I had to start getting up at 5 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
because just the way their schedule worked, I can't go in the middle of the day. It's not really close to my office.
Right.
And I certainly can't go in the afternoon because I have a family.
Right.
So my only option was to go to their 5:30 a.m. class. And you want to know what's the funny thing? It really freaking sucked for like the first 2 to 3 weeks. I mean, I'm
Yeah,
talking
man,
like
nobody wants to be working up at 5 o'clock in the morning to do
yeah.
that.
Well, but I felt like I was a zombie.
Right.
But the funny thing is, with the discussion you and I are having right now, I was going through that learning zone. I was retraining myself on how to accept new things.
Okay. All right. Stop right there. What you just said capsulizes this entire episode. Retraining yourself to accept new outcomes. That is that's the definition of getting out of your comfort zone. You're literally retraining your head to deal with the unknown, with things that are new, which change ups, things either that are foisted on you or you've actually made that decision on your own.
But the funny thing is, that's what it took. I had to almost kind of like go through a little bit of shell shock the system.
Right.
And the funny thing is, so I'm probably about 2 years, 2 years now into going to this gym.
Mm-hmm.
I could not imagine a time not going. I mean, it is as much a part of me as I am bald.
Right.
Right. I mean, it is like, and the funny thing is, we went on vacation not too long ago. Obviously, I'm not working out during that time. I mean, I could not wait to get home just to go back.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Right? You go through withdrawals. Yeah.
And for what it's worth, the owner of this gym, I absolutely love this guy. His name's Daniel. I'm going to give him a quick plug because he's a small business entrepreneur and I love what he does. So his gym is in Rancho Santa Margarita. It's called OC Fit.
Okay.
But it's just such a cool experience. And the funny thing is now, 2 years in, I can kind of feel myself verging back into a little bit of a comfort zone because I've gotten used to that schedule. So now I'm talking with him and my wife, who's also very good about the food side of things, on what are the areas I can look at there to get additional results. Right. And that's really hard because I freaking love to eat. I could eat 2 lunches in one day, if I had the time.
Yeah. But see, what you're talking about there is the essence of being comfortable, challenging your comforts. Okay. Manually overriding the circuit and doing things because it's going to help. You've already had the experience. You've already walked down that. You felt the pain of getting up really early and going in half awake, but you persisted with it, and now you understand that you can do that in other areas of your life without the worry of, oh my God, what's going to happen if this doesn't work.
And that's exactly how I'd like to end this discussion today. Is the funny thing is, once you go through maybe 2 of these episodes, and again, they don't have to be life-changing.
Right.
Like, this is not like you're quitting your job tomorrow to then start a business from scratch for the first time. It doesn't need to be that dynamic.
Right.
But once you go through maybe a couple of these experiences, the funny thing is your confidence to be able to go through the next one.
Yes.
The fear zone almost doesn't even freaking exist at that point.
Right.
It's more of just like, all right, let me collect enough information to make sure I just don't do this totally wrong.
Yes.
And then you're just running at it.
Yeah.
And so that's the thing that I'd like to share with people, especially if you're in a mode where you're just not used to working in a spot that's uncomfortable. Force yourself to dive into it. Don't worry necessarily about the outcome. Focus yourself on getting out of the comfort zone and through the fear zone so that you can then start learning again.
Interesting. That's a great place to finish this whole thing up. All right, folks. Yeah, listen, if you have issues with your own comfort zone or there's something you've really wanted to do and for some reason you just haven't been able to develop the drive, the motivation, anything to actually pursue it, what you are dealing with is a very, very well cultivated comfort zone that you're going to have to break. And it might mean you get help from somebody else, but what it really means is you have to have that intention of wanting to try the unexpected and get used to the fact that failure doesn't mean you're going to die. It just means you might learn something new. And that's really what gets you moving forward. So thanks for being with us today. As always, Business Wingmen shows are on every podcast platform out there. So whether you like to go to Spotify or iHeart or Apple, we're out there. Just type in Business Wingmen, you'll find our page, and then you will find all the episodes that we've done up until this point. This is actually episode number 91. So we got a lot of material out there that is focused on professional development, how you become a better version of yourself. So we hope you'll listen to as many as you want and take some things away from it so you can actually experience some good stuff in your own life. All right. Thanks for being with us today. We'll be back next Tuesday with more great content. But in the meantime, have a good one. Take care. See you, Travis.